There is a kind of cold that does not bite. It presses. It leans on you the way a heavy hand leans on a young man's shoulder to teach him stillness, and up on the saddle at Coldwater Mesa, 11,000 feet above anything that grew, the cold pressed on all of us from the moment the stars went out. I have run gun lines for 26 years. I have stood on ranges in 3 deserts and 2 mountain ranges and a swamp that tried to take my boots and my soul both, and I will tell you that the saddle was the meanest ground I ever scored a shot on. The wind there did not blow. It schemed. My name is Aaron Vance. Back then they called me Master Sergeant, and the younger shooters called me the Old Man when they thought I could not hear, and I let them, because a man who has given a quarter-century to the long gun earns the right to be called old by boys who think they will live forever. My knee was already ruined by then. A bad fall off a tower in a year I will not name had left the joint full of gravel that the surgeons could never quite get out, and on cold mornings it spoke to me in a low complaining voice that no amount of coffee could quiet. That morning it complained early. That should have told me something. My knee always knew before I did when the day was going to ask too much of all of us. I want to tell this right because I have told it wrong before, told it short, told it as a tale to make boys sit up, and every time I cut a corner I felt I had cheated her. So I will tell it slow. I will tell it the way she did everything, which was patient and without a single wasted motion, and with a kind of quiet that made the loud men around her look like what they were. The saddle was a granite shelf that ran out from the mesa like a tongue, and at its lip the world simply ended. Below that lip the ground fell away into a glacial moraine 3,000 and some meters deep, a long bowl of broken rock and old ice and stunted scrub where the wind came up off the valley floor, hit the cold air sinking off the snowfields above, and tangled into layers that fought one another all the way to the far wall. On that far wall, painted white and bolted to the granite, hung a steel plate the size of a barn door that the range crews had named the Anvil. 3,200 meters, 2 miles near enough, of the worst air a bullet ever had to swim through. The Anvil was there because somebody high up had decided that the coalition needed a certification standard for extreme long-range work, and the saddle was the only place in the whole theater where you could lay out that kind of distance and still have a backstop God himself had built. Men came from 4 Allied armies to try the Anvil. Most went home without ringing it. I ran the line. That was my job. I scored the shots, I logged the dope. I kept the boys from doing anything that would get them or anyone below the lip killed, and I had final say on who shot and who did not. It was, in the small kingdom of that frozen shelf, a kind of crown, and I wore it the way you wear a thing that has cost you more than it ever paid without thinking about it much, but never able to take it off. That morning we were setting up for a certification shoot. 8 shooters had made the cut to attempt the Anvil competition men, special unit men, the best the Allied line had sent forward that season, all of them young and hard and sure of themselves in the way that the very good are before the very good thing finally humbles them. They were good. I want that understood. None of what happened that day happened because the men were fools. They were not fools. They were simply men who had never met the wind on the saddle, and men who had never met her. She was already there when I came up to the firing line in the dark. I noticed her the way you notice a still thing in a moving room. The others were stamping their feet and slapping their arms and talking too loud the way nervous good men do, and she was sitting on an ammunition crate at the far end of the line with her rifle case across her knees, doing nothing, looking at the place where the Anvil would be when the light came. Not at the valley, at the Anvil, as if she could already see it. She wore the same cold weather kit as everyone else, plate carrier and snow overwhites gone gray with use, a watch cap pulled low, a scarf up over her chin against the press of that cold. She was not large. She did not need to be. There was an economy to the way she held herself, a sense of a thing folded down to exactly its working size and no larger, that I had seen maybe 4 times in my life, and every time on someone who turned out to be far more dangerous than they looked. I did not know her name. The roster had her down as a late ad, attached from a coalition liaison cell, and the only thing written in the column where a man's reputation usually rode ahead of him was a single word I took at first for a typo. Tallow. Like the fat they used to make candles from. I thought it was a clerk's mistake. I would learn before the sun was halfway up the sky that it was the only true thing on that whole roster. I limped down the line checking gear in the blue dark, and when I came to her she stood without a sound and let me look at her rifle. It was a Barrett, the big 50, the long, heavy anti-materiel gun that most men can barely hold steady and that fewer still can make sing at distance. Hers was worn the way a working tool is worn, the finish gone silver gray along the bolt and the cheek piece dark with the oil of 1,000 hours, and when I lifted it, the balance came up into my hand so true that I knew before I set it down that whoever had built that load and betted that action had forgotten more about long guns than most of the boys on the line would ever learn. I set it down. She watched me do it. She did not say a word, and neither did I, and something passed between us anyway, the way it does between two people who have both spent their lives listening to the same quiet. "Wind's going to lie to you today," I said, because it was true and because I wanted to hear her voice. She looked out at the dark bowl where the wind was already moving, already braiding itself into the layers that would torment us all morning. "Wind always lies," she said. Her voice was low and even, no edge to it, no fear. "You just have to know which lie it's telling." Then the light started to come up gray over the far wall, and the convoy of the man who was going to walk past her without a glance came grinding up the mesa road, and the day began in earnest. You heard the general before you saw him. That was the first thing about him, and in the end it was the thing that mattered, because she was the opposite of that in every way that a person can be. His convoy came up the switchbacks with the engines roaring and the gun trucks throwing gravel, 4 vehicles where one would have done, and when they swung onto the shelf and parked in a hard military line, the doors all opened at once like the place was being seized rather than visited. Staff officers boiled out into the cold in pressed field uniforms that had never had dust on them. Aides carried folders. A photographer carried a long camera, and in the middle of all of it, walking with the rolling certainty of a man who has not been told no in a very long time, came Lieutenant General Hollis Crane. I knew him by reputation, the way everyone forward of the rear knew him. Crane was a hard, capable, intelligent man who had built a real career on real competence, and somewhere along the climb, he had decided that the competence entitled him to a contempt for anyone who did not display theirs the way he displayed his, loudly, and on schedule, and to the right audience. He had come up to the saddle to watch the certification shoot, to put his face beside the famous anvil for the photographer, and to remind the forward units that the man at the top was watching. He had not come to learn anything. Men like Crane that year did not come to ranges to learn. They came to be seen learning nothing, because they believed there was nothing left for them to learn. He worked the line the way such men do, fast and loud, pausing at each shooter long enough to ask a question he already knew the answer to and to deliver a verdict nobody had asked for. He told the first man his stance was too wide. He told the second his glass was too cheap for the distance. He told the third, who was one of the finest shooters I have ever watched, that he hoped the man wasn't going to embarrass the uniform today, and the third man's jaw went tight and he said, "No, sir," and that was that. Crane moved down the line like weather. His staff trailed him, writing things in folders. The photographer walked backward in front of him, catching the good light on his face. I limped along a pace behind, because it was my line, and a man stands by his line. And I watched him come to her. She had stood up when the convoy arrived, the way you stand for rank, and she stood now at the end of the line with her Barrett upright beside her, butt on the snow, barrel toward the gray sky, her hand resting easy on the receiver. She did not brace. She did not perform attention. She simply stood, composed and still, the way she had sat on the crate in the dark, a folded and finished thing in a line of men still unfolding themselves into the morning. Crane reached the seventh shooter, said something about windage I did not catch, and the photographer got the shot, and then the general turned to move on to the end of the line where she stood. And for one moment, I have gone back to this moment 1,000 times, for one moment he looked at her. He looked at her rifle, the worn silver-gray Barrett that any man who knew guns should have stopped and studied. He looked at her overwhites and her plate carrier and the scarf at her chin and the watch cap pulled low. He looked at the small, still shape of her at the end of his line. And he walked past. He did not pause. He did not ask her name or her call sign or her stance or her glass. He did not deliver a verdict. He simply let his eyes slide off her the way water slides off oilcloth, and he walked past her to the lip of the shelf where the photographer wanted him for the picture with the anvil behind. And in walking past her, he said one thing, not even to her, over his shoulder to me. "Whose is this?" he said, with a small backward tip of his head toward her, the way you'd ask about a piece of gear left in the wrong place. I started to answer. I do not know what I would have said because she answered first in that low, even voice, no edge to it at all. "Mine, sir," she said. She meant the rifle. She meant the line. She meant, I think now, far more than either. But Crane heard only a soldier speaking out of turn, and he stopped and turned and looked at her properly for the first time, which is to say he looked at her the way a man looks at an obstacle. "It speaks," he said to his staff, and a couple of them laughed the small obligatory laugh that staff officers learn the way other men learn to march. Then he looked her up and down, openly, taking her measure and finding it short, and he said the thing that I have carried in my chest for the rest of my life like a stone I cannot set down. "Sergeant," he said to me, though I was a master sergeant and he knew it, I came a long way to watch the best shooters in this theater ring the anvil. I did not come to watch a liaison clerk play soldier with a gun she can't lift off the bench. He turned back to her. "I'm sure you do good work in your cell, but this is a certification line, not a charity. I don't run a charity." He said it again, slower, the way a man says a thing he likes the sound of. "I don't run a charity. Get her off my line." And that was the disrespect, named and concrete, the thing the niche is built on, the thing I have to set down on the page exactly as it happened so you understand what came after. He did not strike her. He did not even raise his voice. He just decided in the time it took to walk 4 steps that she was nothing, and he ordered her removed, and he turned away to have his picture taken before I had even finished hearing the words. I have wondered since whether it would have been better if he had shouted or shoved or done some loud, cruel thing. The loud cruelties are easier to answer. They announce themselves. They invite a response. What Crane did was quieter and worse. He looked at a person and decided she did not warrant his attention, and then he gave an order to make the world match his decision. That is a thing that happens to good people every day, in armies and out of them, and most of the time there is no anvil at 3,200 meters waiting to settle the account. Most of the time the quiet ones simply gather up their gear and go where they are sent, and the loud men never learn what they walked past. I have thought about all the lines I have run over the years, all the quiet ones I scored and forgot, and I have wondered how many of them I walked past too. The honest answer is the one I do not like. But I did not know any of that yet. What I knew, standing on that cold shelf with the general's order hanging in the air, was that I had been told to pull a shooter off my own line, and that the shooter was looking at me, not pleading, not protesting, just looking level and calm, waiting to see what kind of man I was. "Sir," I started. "Master Sergeant," Crane did not even turn around, "I gave you an instruction. A man learns where the walls are in an army. You learn which orders you can lean on and which ones will break you if you push. A 3-star general standing on your line in front of his staff and a photographer is a wall, and I was a master sergeant with a ruined knee and 4 years to my pension, and the truth that I am not proud of is that I obeyed. I turned to her, and I could not quite meet her eyes, and I said the words. "You'd better stand down," I said. "Secure your weapon, I'll find you something off the line." I expected, I do not know what I expected, argument, a flush of anger. The hot words that any of the young men on that line would have spent if a general had called them a clerk playing soldier. What I got was none of that. She looked at me a moment longer, and then she nodded once, a small economical nod, and she bent and laid the big Barrett into its case with the same care a man uses to lay a sleeping child in a crib, and she latched it, and she straightened, and she said, "Where do you want me, Master Sergeant?" No edge, no heat, just the question, and underneath it, so quiet I almost missed it, something that was not defeat. I have tried for years to name it, and the closest I can come is this. She was not surprised. Whatever Crane had decided about her, she had been decided about by men like him before, more times than I could count, and she had long ago stopped spending herself on the deciding. She had folded that anger down to its working size and put it away, and what was left was a stillness that no general's order could touch, because it did not live anywhere a general could reach. "Brass detail," I heard myself say, hatting it. "And sandbags, we're short on the forward berm. Sergeant Ostrowski'll show you." "Yes, Master Sergeant," she said, and picked up her case and went. So while 8 of the finest shooters in the theater prepared to attempt the most difficult shot on the continent, the one person on that shelf who I would learn could actually make it spent the first hours of the morning carrying sandbags and picking spent brass out of the snow. And the general had his picture taken at the lip of the world with the anvil shining white behind him. And I went back to running my line with a sour weight in my gut that I told myself was the cold. It was not the cold. I kept half an eye on her while I worked, the way you keep an eye on a thing that bothers you without knowing why. The forward berm was a low wall of filled sandbags that protected the spotting position, and it had slumped over the winter and needed building back up, which is brute miserable work at altitude. You fill the bags from the gravel pit with a short shovel, and you carry them, 60 pounds wet, up the slope to the berm, and you set them and tamp them, and your lungs burn and your hands go numb through the gloves and your back becomes a single long ache. The young soldier Ostrowski, who'd been told to oversee her, gave up overseeing inside of 20 minutes and just worked alongside her, because there is no man alive who can stand and watch someone else do that work and keep his self-respect. They built the berm together, the boy and the woman the general had called a clerk, and I noticed, this is the first thing I noticed, the first crack of light, that she worked the way she'd done everything else. No wasted motion. She filled each bag to the same weight, tied each one the same way, set each one with its long axis crossing the one beneath so the wall would knit instead of slump. She built a sandbag berm the way a master builds anything, and Ostrowski, who was no fool, stopped trying to lead and started trying to match her, and could not. And every so often between bags, she would straighten with a 60-pound load against her chest and turn her head and look out over the lip at the bowl, at the wind moving in the scrub, at the far white face of the anvil. Just a glance, a reading, the way you or I might check a clock without deciding to. She was working the wind in her head the whole time she carried sand, building a picture of that bowl layer by layer, while the men on my line ran their fancy weather meters and read their fancy charts, and got ready to learn that none of it would be enough. I did not understand yet what I was seeing, but I felt it the way the knee feels weather. Something was coming. The certification chute opened at full light, with the sun a hard white coin behind high cloud and the wind already up to its tricks down the bowl. I want to walk you through it carefully, because the proof in this story is not one shot. People who tell it short make it one shot, the miracle at the end, and that is a lie that cheapens her. The proof was the whole day. It was 8 of the best men in the theater failing, one at a time in front of a general, against a problem none of them could solve. And it was her, off the line in the snow, with brass in her pockets, solving it in her head while she was forbidden to touch a gun. The anvil at 3,200 meters is not a shooting problem the way most shooting is a shooting problem. At that distance, the bullet is in the air for the better part of 6 seconds, and in 6 seconds a great deal can happen to a bullet. It rises and falls through more than 100 feet of arc. It drifts sideways with the spin of the earth itself. And it crosses on the saddle, not one wind but four, the near wind coming up off the gravel at the shooter's feet, a middle wind running crossways down the length of the bowl, a high wind sinking cold off the snowfields and pushing the opposite way, and right at the foot of the far wall a strange dead pocket where the air, having nowhere left to go, simply stacked and swirled. Four winds, each at its own speed and its own angle, each working on the bullet for a different slice of those 6 seconds. To ring the anvil, you did not solve the wind. You solved 4 winds in sequence, and you got every one of them right, because a bullet that swims true through 3 layers and wrong through the 4th misses by a body length, and the steel stays silent. The first shooter was the competition man, the one Crane had worn not to embarrass the uniform. He was very good. He set up on the bench with a discipline that was a pleasure to watch, built his position, read his meter, dialed his scope, and settled in behind the gun with the stillness of a man who had made 10,000 hard shots. I called the line clear. He fired. We watched the trace. At that distance, on a cold morning, you can sometimes see the faint corkscrew of disturbed air the bullet leaves, and the spotters call it like men calling a horse race. The round went out true and clean and flat, and for 5.5 seconds I thought he had it. And then in the last quarter second, down in that dead swirling pocket at the foot of the wall, the bullet got shouldered sideways by something none of his instruments had told him about, and it struck the granite a yard left of the steel and threw up a puff of stone dust, and the anvil stayed silent. Left, called the spotter, just left foot maybe. The competition man worked his bolt and breathed and said nothing. Crane, watching from his folding chair with a thermos of coffee somebody had carried up for him, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. The second shooter missed right. The third missed low. He'd overread the near wind and underread the high one, and the round dropped into the scrub 40 feet below the plate. The fourth rang nothing but rock. The fifth, who I'd had money on in my own head, got closer than any of them, a hand's breadth from the steel, close enough that we all leaned forward, and still the anvil stayed silent, and he sat back from the gun with the particular stillness of a proud man who has just learned the limit of his pride. By the time the 6th shooter set up, the mood on the line had changed. The loud confidence of the dawn was gone. These were not men who missed. They missed maybe 1 shot in 100 at distances that would make most shooters weep, and here they were, 6 of them, missing the same plate one after another, and the wind down that bowl was laughing at all of them, and the general was sitting in his chair making his small sounds, and the photographer had stopped taking pictures because there was nothing to take a picture of. A miss is not a photograph. I want to be fair to those men. The anvil on the saddle that morning may genuinely have been the hardest single shot on the planet that day. There is no shame in what they failed to do. The shame, if there was shame anywhere, belonged to the man in the folding chair who had taken the one person who could read that bowl and sent her to carry sandbags. Because she was reading it. I could see her now, up on the forward berm she'd built, standing still with a half-filled bag forgotten in her hands, watching each shot. And after the third miss I saw her do something that turned the cold weight in my gut into something sharper. After the third man fired and missed low, she looked at the trace, and then she looked down at the scrub 40 feet below the plate where his round had landed, and she gave a small nod, not surprise. Confirmation. She had known where that round was going to land before it landed. She'd read the same wind he'd read wrong, read it right, and watched his bullet go exactly where her reading said it would. She wasn't watching the shooters. She was watching the wind prove her right 8 times, while she stood in the snow with sand on her gloves. The 6th shooter missed. The 7th missed. And when the 8th and last man, the youngest, a quiet, hard kid who'd come up through the competition circuit with a real gift, sat back from his rifle after his round sailed, a body length right of the anvil, and the steel stayed silent for the 8th time, a kind of awful quiet came down over the whole shelf. 8 of the best in the theater. 8 misses. And a general who had come a long way to watch men ring a famous plate, and had instead watched them all fail, in front of his staff and his photographer and the cold, indifferent anvil. Crane stood up out of his folding chair. He was not making small sounds anymore. A man like that does not enjoy watching a thing he attached his face to turn into a failure, and the failure was now total and public, and he needed it to become a success again. And the only material he had left was 8 men who had already given him their best. "Again," he said, "reset and run it again. One of you is going to ring that plate before I leave this mountain." And it was into that silence, into that brittle, furious quiet on the lip of the world, that she spoke for the second time that day. She had come down off the berm. I had not seen her move. She was standing at the edge of the firing line now, just behind the benches, brass still in her pockets, sand still on her gloves, and she said, not loudly, not to the general, but to me, to the range master, the way a soldier properly speaks through the chain, to the man who ran the line. "Master Sergeant, the near wind's been backing left for the last 20 minutes. It's not the pocket beating them now. It's the near wind. They're all still holding for the morning value." The line went quiet in a new way. A general does not like to be corrected on his own line by a person he has already dismissed. Crane turned, and the contempt was back on his face, ready, and he opened his mouth to put her in her place a second time. But the 8th shooter, the young one, the one with the gift, the one who just sat back from a miss with the truth of his own limits cold in his chest, that young man turned around on his bench and looked at her, and something in his face had already changed. Good shooters know the sound of a true thing when they hear it. He had felt his own last round get pushed, and it had not felt like the pocket. It had felt like something nearer. And here was this woman the general had called a clerk, saying out loud the exact thing his hands had felt, and his mind had not yet named. "Say that again," the young man said, quietly, to her, not to the general. She did not look at Crane. She kept her eyes on the bowl, on the near flags down at the lip where the gravel wind moved the streamers, and she said, "Your near winds backed left and picked up. Started about the time the sun cleared the cloud. You're all still dialing the value you measured at first light, full value left to right, near zero up close. But the near wind swung. It's pushing your round left in the first 300 meters now, before the trajectory even climbs into the middle layer. By the time it gets down to the pocket, it's already a foot left of where your solution thinks it is, and then the pocket takes whatever's left. You're not missing because of the far wall. You're missing because of the ground at your own feet, and you stopped watching it an hour ago." Silence, the kind of silence that has weight, that you can feel pressing on your ears like the cold. I have run lines for 26 years, and I will tell you that what she had just done was a thing I had seen perhaps twice before in my life. She had read a 4-layer wind problem in her head from 40 feet behind the benches, without a meter, without firing a sighter, without ever putting her eye behind a scope. And her reading was more complete and more current than the reading 8 elite shooters had built with the best instruments the coalition could buy. She had caught the one variable that had turned in the last 20 minutes, the one thing the men had measured once at dawn and trusted ever since, and she had named it flat and plain in front of the man who had sent her to carry sand. Crane found his voice. "And I suppose," he said, with the heavy sarcasm of a man whose morning has gone badly, "the liaison clerk would like to demonstrate." She turned and looked at him then. Just looked. No heat, no challenge, nothing a man could take offense at, and that was somehow worse for him than defiance would have been, because there was nothing in her face to push against. There was only a quiet certainty, the certainty of someone who has known a true thing for a long time and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. "If the master sergeant clears me to the line," she said, "yes, sir, I would. It was my line. I want that remembered." Crane could order a shooter off it, because he was a general and generals can do as they please, but the clearing of a shooter to fire, the final word that a person and a weapon and a moment were safe and ready, that was mine, by the rules of the range, and Crane knew it. And for one long moment the two facts hung there against each other on the lip of the world. I looked at her. I looked at the worn silver-gray Barrett still in its case by the berm where she'd left it. I looked at the young shooter, who had turned all the way around now and was watching her with open hunger, the hunger of a craftsman who has just heard a master speak and wants more. And I thought about the sandbags, knit long axis crossing so the wall would hold, and the brass picked clean out of the snow, and the way she'd read the third man's miss before it landed. "Clear her up," I said. "She shoots." Crane's jaw worked, but he had built his whole morning on the idea that the best shooters would ring the anvil and make his picture, and the best shooters had failed 8 times, and now there was nothing left for him but to let her try and fail too, for that, I am sure, is what he expected, what he needed. A clerk's miss to put the uppity woman back in her place and restore the proper order of his world. He waved a hand, a small disgusted wave, permission and dismissal in one motion. "By all means," he said, "let's all watch." She went and got her rifle. I have watched 10,000 shooters set up on a bench. Most of them, even the good ones, do 100 small things, adjust and readjust, fuss with the bipod, settle and resettle, talk to themselves, breathe loud. She did almost nothing, and every nothing was exact. She laid the Barrett on the front bag and set the rear bag under the toe of the stock and squared her body behind it on the frozen mat, and her bad weather bulk seemed to fold down and lock into the gun until the two of them, woman and rifle, were a single still object on the lip of the world. She did not dial her scope first. That was the thing the young shooter noticed, and I heard him draw breath. She read first. She lay there behind the glass for a full minute, 2 minutes, just reading the near flags, the mid-bowl scrub, the high snow haze coming off the fields, the dead shimmer at the foot of the far wall, building the 4-layer picture fresh and current. Right then, not at dawn. Then she pulled a small card from her chest pocket, a dope card gone soft and gray with handling, and she wrote on it with a stub of pencil. She did the arithmetic of all 4 winds by hand in the cold and wrote the solution down, and only then did she reach up and dial her scope, elevation, then windage, her gloved fingers sure on the turrets, counting clicks under her breath so soft I felt them more than heard them. And she loaded 1 round. 1, I want you to understand what that meant, because it is the heart of who she was. The men before her had loaded magazines, 5 and 10 rounds, because that is how you shoot when you expect to miss and correct, to walk your fire onto the target, to spend rounds buying information. She loaded a single cartridge, seated it, closed the bolt on it with a soft oiled snick, and that 1 round was a statement plainer than anything she had said all day. It said, "I am not going to walk this on. I am going to read it and solve it and place it once." She did not expect to miss. She had built a life out of not missing, and she had built it 1 carefully loaded round at a time, and she was not going to insult the anvil or herself by treating this like a thing to be guessed at. Crane watched her load the single round and made his small sound again. He thought it was arrogance. He did not yet know it was the opposite, that it was the deepest kind of discipline, the discipline of a person who has earned the right to need only one. She settled. She breathed. And then, with everything set, with the round chambered and the solution dialed and her body locked behind the gun and 8 elite shooters and a 3-star general watching, she did not fire. She waited. Seconds went by, 10, 20, 30. The line grew restless. Crane shifted in his chair. "Any time," he said. She did not answer. She lay behind the gun, utterly still, her eye on the glass, her finger off the trigger and laid alongside the guard, and she waited, and I understood, watching her, what she was waiting for, because I had seen the great ones do it, though never quite like this. She was waiting for the wind to tell the truth. The flags down the bowl were never still, but they had a rhythm if you watched long enough, a breathing in and out as the gusts came and lay down, and the honest value of the wind, the value you could trust a bullet to for 6 whole seconds, only showed itself in the brief flats between gusts, when the streamers all sagged at once, and the air down the whole length of the bowl agreed with itself for a moment. She was waiting for that moment. She was waiting for all 4 winds to lie down at once and tell her the same true thing, and she would not send her single round into the air until they did. because she had read them too well to trust them when they lied. A minute passed, then more. I counted it later off the range log and the spotter's notes, and it came to 91 seconds from the time she settled to the time she fired, 91 seconds of a general's impatience and 8 men's held breath and the cold pressing down on all of us. And through every second of it she did not move, did not waver, did not so much as tighten. Crane opened his mouth to order her to fire or get off the gun, and at that exact moment down the bowl the flag sagged. The near streamer dropped. The mid-bowl scrub went still. The high haze settled. For one breath the whole tortured length of the bowl lay down and agreed, and in that breath, soft as a sigh, with no jerk and no haste, her Barrett fired. I have heard a lot of rifles fire. The Big 50 has a hard, flat crack that you feel in your sternum, and hers cracked and rolled out over the bowl, and the round went into the air, and we watched the trace. 6 seconds is a long time to watch a bullet. The trace went out flat and true, climbing into the middle layer, and I found I had stopped breathing. It crossed the mid-bowl where 6 men's rounds had been shouldered off course, and it held. It climbed through the high sink coming off the snowfields, and it held. And in the last quarter second it dropped down toward that dead, swirling pocket at the foot of the far wall that had eaten so many rounds that morning. And it held. And the white face of the anvil 3,200 meters away rang. You do not hear the strike right away at that distance. You see it first, a hard, bright spang of the round flattening on steel, dead center, a flower of lead blooming and dropping off the plate. And then, a long, long moment later, the sound came back to us across the bowl, a deep, clear bell note rolling up off the granite, the anvil singing. And it ran out over the shelf and over all of us and over the general in his folding chair. And the silence that followed it was the loudest silence I have ever stood inside. She worked the bolt once smooth, and the single spent case arced out and fell into the snow, and she lifted her eye from the glass. And she did not smile, and she did not look at Crane, and she did not look at any of us. She looked out at the anvil she had just rung at 2 miles with 1 cold round on a back near wind that 8 better-equipped men had read wrong, and her face held the same quiet it had held in the dark on the ammunition crate before the sun came up. As if she had simply confirmed a thing she already knew. As if the wind had finally, after all morning, told her the truth, and she had thanked it the only way she knew how, which was to put a round through it dead center, and let the steel say what needed saying. The young shooter, the 8th man, the one with the gift, stood up off his bench and faced her and said, "Lo, how?" Not a challenge, a prayer almost. How? She rolled off the gun and stood, and picked up the single spent case out of the snow and put it in her pocket. She policed her own brass even then, even after that, an old hard habit. And she looked at the young man and said the only thing she said about the shot itself, the thing I have carried with the general's words all these years, the two of them paired in my chest like a wound and its healing. "Fear is the only thing you keep in your head," she said. "Everything else you write down so your hands don't have to be brave." And she held up the soft gray dope card with the whole 4-wind solution penciled on it in her cramped, neat hand. The elevation and the 4 windage values and the time of flight. The entire arithmetic of the impossible laid out in graphite. And the young man took it from her like a man taking communion. And he read it. And I watched him understand that he had just been handed more shooting wisdom on 1 soft card than the competition circuit had taught him in 10 years. Crane had not moved. He was standing now. He had stood when the anvil rang, I think without deciding to, and he was staring at the far white plate 2 miles off with an expression I could not read, the expression of a man whose picture of the world has just taken a blow it was not built to take. He had walked past her. He had called her a clerk playing soldier. He had said he did not run a charity and sent her to carry sand, and she had taken his rifle line and his famous anvil and his whole hard morning, and wrung the truth out of all of it with a single round while he watched. I waited for him to speak. I think we all did. There is a thing men like Crane do in that moment, a recovering, a finding of some words to put the order back, and I waited to hear what his would be. But before he found them, the radio on the spotter's bench broke squelch, and the day stopped being about a plate of steel and started being about men's lives. It was the convoy net. There was a fuel run that came up the Mesa Road every third day to feed the generators and the vehicles at the forward camp below the saddle, and it ran on a schedule we all knew, and the road it ran on crossed. This is the thing. This is the terrible geometry of it. The road crossed the bottom of the bowl. Not the impact area. The certified impact area was the far wall and the pocket, well clear of the road. But the road ran along the near floor of the bowl, below the lip, below the firing line, in a place that was safe so long as nothing went wrong. And at the worst possible moment, something went wrong. The voice on the radio was young and tight with the particular flatness men use when they are frightened and trying hard not to sound it. A fuel truck, the lead truck, the heavy one, had lost its brakes on the grade where the road bent along the bowl floor, and it had gone off the shoulder and rolled, and it was down on its side in the scrub at the bottom of the bowl with diesel running out of it, and the driver was pinned in the cab, alive, calling on the net, hurt and trapped and unable to get clear. And the truck had come to rest, God help us, the truck had come to rest at the foot of the far wall in the very pocket, almost directly below the anvil, right in the live impact lane, right where, for the certification chute, rounds had been falling all morning. We had ceased fire, of course. The moment the convoy net broke, I'd called the line cold, and the rules of the range made the impact area safe so long as no one fired. But the rules of the range did not pull a man out of a pinned cab, and they did not stop diesel from pooling under a hot engine, and they did not change the fact that the truck and the trapped man were at the foot of a 2-mile wall with no road in and no way to reach them fast. It got worse as the picture came together over the next few minutes, the way these things always come together, one bad fact at a time. The recovery vehicle was an hour back down the mountain. The medevac bird was grounded by weather on the far side of the range and could not get over the mesa in the wind. And this was the thing that turned my stomach to ice. There was a second vehicle in that convoy, a gun truck that had not gone off the road, that was still up on the grade above the wreck, and the men in it, good men trying to help, were about to do the most natural and most lethal thing in the world. They were going to drive down into the bowl floor to reach the pinned driver. And the only route down, the spotters confirmed it, glassing the bowl, the only route the gun truck could take to get to the wreck ran directly across the live impact lane and along the base of the far wall, through the exact ground where, if the certification chute resumed or if anyone fired, rounds would fall. That should have been fine, we'd ceased fire. The lane was cold, but here is the geometry that nearly killed them, a rockfall. The roll of the heavy fuel truck had cracked loose a shelf of frost-shattered granite high on the far wall, directly above the wreck and the route the gun truck would take, and the spotters could see it through the glass. A great loosened slab, hanging, held by nothing but friction and cold, with a long crack running black behind it. When it let go, and it was going to let go, it would come down the wall in a slide of rock and ice and bury the bowl floor at the foot of the wall under tons of granite. The wreck, the pinned driver, and any rescue vehicle foolish enough to be down there when it fell. And the gun truck on the grade, not able to see the slab from their angle, not knowing, was even now starting down into the bowl to reach their friend. We tried to raise them. The convoy net was bad in the bowl, garbled by the granite, and the gun truck's radio was the worst of the lot, and we could hear them but they could barely hear us, and the words that needed to reach them, stop, hold, do not enter the bowl floor, the wall is coming down, broke up into static every time. I had the spotter trying. I had the young liaison officer from Crane's staff trying on his own set. We could not get through. We could hear the gun truck's engine note change as it started down the grade, committing to the descent, 4 men driving straight toward a slab of mountain that was going to fall on them inside of minutes, and we could not make them hear us tell them to stop. There is a particular helplessness in watching men drive toward their deaths and being unable to shout loud enough to stop them. I have felt it before. I felt it then, standing on the lip with the radio in my hand spitting static, and I looked at Crane, and Crane, I will give him this, whatever else he was not a coward and he was not stupid. Crane had gone white and was barking at his staff to find another net, another relay, anything, and there was nothing. The bird was down. The recovery was an hour out. The radios couldn't punch through the granite. There was no one who could reach those men in time. No one who could reach them with a radio. She was already moving. I did not see her decide. I have thought about that too over the years, that there was no visible moment of decision, no squaring of the shoulders, no look around for permission. There was the problem, and then there was her solving it, and the space between was too small to see. She was back down on her mat behind the Barrett before I fully understood what she meant to do, reading the bowl again with her eye to the glass. And when I did understand, the understanding came with a kind of vertigo, because what she meant to do was a thing I would have called impossible if I had not, 20 minutes before, watched her ring the anvil. She meant to bring the slab down herself, on purpose, before the gun truck got under it. She meant to put a heavy .50 caliber round into the crack behind that hanging slab of granite and start the slide early now, while the rescue vehicle was still up on the grade and clear, so that the wall would fall into an empty bowl floor instead of onto 4 living men. And she meant to do it in a way that brought the slab down and away from the wreck, so the rock slid clear of the pinned driver instead of onto him. I have set down a lot of hard truths in this telling, and I will set down this one plainly. I did not believe she could do it. Ringing a static plate dead center is one thing. This was something else. This was reading a different problem entirely. Not a clean shot at a known target on a settled wind, but a shot into a specific crack in a specific slab on a wind that had come up again and was no longer lying down. A shot that had to strike not just accurately, but in exactly the right place to lever the slab off the wall in exactly the right direction, with men's lives riding on every part of it being right the first time, because there would be no walking it on, no second sighter. No time, the gun truck was on the grade, the clock was the gun truck. She read it the way she'd read everything, fast and total and without panic. "Master Sergeant," she said, I still on the glass, voice still that low even thing with no fear in it anywhere, "the wind's crossing now. Came up out of the flat about 90 seconds ago, it's not falling anymore, it's running left to right across the bowl, 10, gusting 15. I can't wait for it to lie down. I don't have the time." She paused a half second, the only half second she spent on it. "I'm going to take the slab on the upwind side of the crack so the round walks into the fracture as it drifts. Bring it down to the south, away from the cab. I need the line cold confirmed, and I need you to tell that gun truck to stop if you can raise them, and if you can't, I need to fire before they're under the wall. Tell me when. I have given a lot of orders and taken a lot of orders in 26 years. I have never, before or since, been handed a decision like the one she handed me in that half second. She was asking me, the range master, the man with the final word on the line, to clear her to put a .50 caliber round into a mountain, on a gusting crosswind, to start an avalanche on purpose above a trapped man and a rescue crew, on the chance that her reading of the wind and the rock and the fracture was good enough to bring the wall down clear instead of down on top of them. If she was wrong, she would kill the driver herself, and maybe the gun truck too, and it would be on my clearing. And if she did nothing, the slab would fall on its own, in its own time, in its own direction, with no one to aim it, and the gun truck was driving under it. I looked through the spare glass at the slab, at the black crack running behind it, at the gun truck nosing down the grade toward the bowl floor. I looked at the loaded round she was seating. One round again, only one, because she did not have time for more, and because she had never in her life needed more than one. I looked at her face, at the iron quiet of it, and I made the only choice a man could make, which was to trust the most competent person I had ever seen do the thing she did better than anyone alive. "Line's cold," I said. My voice did not shake. I am proud of that if I am proud of anything from that day. "Lane's yours. I'll work the radio till the last second. You take your shot when you have it and God go with the round. Keep trying them, she said. I'll hold as long as the truck's clear of the fall line. The second they cross the line, I fire whether the wind's honest or not. So we ran our 2 clocks side by side, the most terrible 2 minutes of my life. On 1 clock I worked the radio, calling the gun truck, telling them to stop, to hold, to back off the grade, the words breaking up in the granite static every time, hearing them not hear me. On the other clock she lay behind the Barrett reading a gusting crosswind, waiting again, that refusal to send a round into a lie, but this time with a hard edge under it, because this time the waiting had a wall to it, a moment past which she could not wait. The moment the gun truck crossed into the ground the rock would fall on. I watched her work the wind with her eye and her bare hand. I watched her read the streamers and the dust, and the way the scrub bent down the bowl, watched her dial a correction, and then another as the gusts changed, watched her hold her finger off the trigger through gust after gust, because the crossing wind was not steady enough to trust, even with the clock running, even with men driving toward death, because a round fired into a lying wind would miss the crack and waste the only shot she had. She would not be hurried into a miss. She would not. She held her discipline against the clock the way she'd held it against the general's impatience. Only now the cost of waiting too long was 4 men under a mountain, and the cost of firing too soon was the same. And she lay in the gap between those costs as still as the granite, waiting for the half-second when the crossing wind would steady enough to trust. There at the bowl floor, the spotter said, his voice cracking. Gun trucks at the floor. They're turning toward the wreck. 30 seconds and they're under the slab. I keyed the radio one last time and got static. And the crossing wind, for one breath, steadied. I felt her fire more than I heard it, felt the flat hard crack of the 50 roll out over the bowl, and the round went into the air on its long 6-second journey, and I lost it. I could not hold the trace, my hands were shaking on the glass, but she did not lose it, she never lost it, and a long, long moment later, 2 miles away and 300 feet up the far wall, a small puff of rock dust bloomed exactly at the black mouth of the crack behind the hanging slab. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the mountain moved. The slab let go along the fracture, the whole great shelf of frost-shattered granite tilting out from the wall, and it came down, but it came down to the south, away from the cab, away from the wreck, sliding off the wall at the angle the round had levered it, and pouring down into the empty scrub a long stone's throw clear of the pinned truck, and well clear of the route the gun truck had taken, a roar of rock and ice and dust thundering up off the bowl floor that we heard a full second after we saw it. A sound like the mountain itself clearing its throat. The dust rolled up the bowl and over the lip and over us, gray and stinging, and through it I could hear, faint on the static broken net, the gun truck crew shouting, not dying, shouting, alive and shocked, and stopped where they were by the wall of rock that had just come down in front of them instead of on top of them, the slide having dropped across their path and walled them off from the fall line 100 meters short of where they'd have been buried. She had brought the mountain down in the one direction that saved all of them. The pinned driver, untouched in his cab, the rock sliding past him to the south. The gun truck, stopped cold by the slide before it could reach the kill zone. 4 men and a 5th, all of them alive, because a woman the general had called a clerk had read a gusting crosswind and a cracked slab of granite, and placed a single 50 caliber round into a fracture the width of a man's hand at 2 miles, and pulled a mountain down the safe way on purpose. The dust hung over the bowl. The anvil, forgotten, gleamed white above the new scar on the wall. And on the lip of the world, the line of us stood in a silence that had no bottom to it, and into that silence she worked her bolt once, and the spent case fell into the snow, and she reached down and picked it up and put it in her pocket with the other one, and she lay there a moment longer with her cheek still on the stock and her eye still on the bowl, and then I saw the only crack in her composure I saw all day. Her gloved hand on the receiver gave one fine tremor, one single shiver of everything she had not let herself feel, and then it stilled, and she closed it into a fist, and the crack was gone as if it had never been. She had not let herself shake until the men were safe, and she let herself shake for exactly 1 second, and then she put it away, the way she put everything away, folded down to its working size and stored where no one could reach it. Crane came down the line. I had been so fixed on the bowl that I had forgotten him, and when I turned he was already moving, walking toward her with none of the rolling certainty he'd brought up the mountain that morning, walking the way a man walks toward a thing he does not understand and can no longer pretend not to see. His staff trailed him, silent now, the photographer's camera hanging dead at his side. He stopped a few feet from where she still lay behind the Barrett, and she rolled off the gun and got to her feet to face him, composed, quiet, sand still on her gloves from the berm he'd sent her to build, and the two of them stood there on the lip of the world, the general and the clerk he'd dismissed, and the whole shelf held its breath. "Who are you?" Crane said. It was not a sneer now. It was not the careless question he'd thrown over his shoulder at dawn, "Whose is this?" It was a real question, asked low, asked by a man who needed the answer, and she heard the difference, and she answered him plainly. "Liaison cells where they put me when I rotated forward, sir," she said. "It's true work and I don't complain about it." A small pause. "Before that I had a different job." "What job?" She did not say it. She did not have to, because Crane's eyes had dropped finally to her chest, to the plate carrier he'd looked past at dawn, to the small embroidered badge stitched there above the name tape, the badge his eyes had slid off that morning the way they'd slid off all of her, and now, this time, he read it. I watched him read it. I watched a 3-star general's face go from confusion to disbelief, to something that was almost fear, the particular awe of a professional recognizing a mastery far beyond his own. I did not know that badge. Most men wouldn't. It was not a thing they hand out at schools or print in manuals. It was a small thing, dark thread on dark cloth, a stylized long rifle over a number, and the number was the only part that read clear at a pace's distance, and the number was 3,200. "That's a confirmed record," Crane said, and his voice had gone quiet and strange. "That badge, you don't get that badge for a range score. You get that for—" He stopped. He looked at her face and then back at the badge and then at the new scar on the far wall where she'd just brought down a mountain to save 5 men, and I watched the last of his old certainty go out of him like water out of a cracked cup. "Get me the file," he said to his staff, without turning, his eyes never leaving her. "The liaison attachment, the real one, whatever's redacted, get it pulled, now." The young liaison officer was already on it, already on his set to the rear, and it took only a few minutes, and I watched Crane's aide come back across the shelf with his own face changed, holding a single sheet he'd written down off the secure net, holding it the way you hold something you're not sure you're allowed to have. He gave it to Crane. Crane read it. I never saw that sheet. I was never cleared to. But I watched the general read it, and I watched him come, line by line, to understand exactly who he had walked past at dawn, what she had done before they rotated her forward to carry a liaison cell's paperwork, the overwatch she had stood, the record behind the badge, the number 3,200, and the night and the men it belonged to, all the redacted weight of it that I will never know and do not need to know. Because I had seen the proof of it with my own eyes that morning, written on a steel plate 2 miles away and on a scar down a granite wall. Crane read it all, and when he was done he stood for a moment with the sheet in his hand and his head bowed, and then he folded it once carefully and handed it back to his aide, and he looked at her. "I walked past you," he said. It was not a question. It was a confession, and he made it in front of his whole staff and my whole line, which is a thing I would not have believed that man capable of at dawn. "I came up this mountain to watch the best in the theater ring that plate, and you were standing at the end of my line, and I looked right at you, and I told this master sergeant to get you off it. I called you a clerk playing soldier. I said I don't run a charity." He drew a breath, and the cold took it and made a cloud of it, and he let it out slow. 8 of the finest shooters I have ever assembled could not ring that plate. You rang it cold, first round, off a wind they all read wrong. And then you brought a mountain down by hand to save 5 of my people, and you did it with one shot on a crossing wind, into a crack I can barely see through good glass. And the whole time you never raised your voice to me. Not once. She said nothing. She stood and let him say it, composed, level, neither softening it nor twisting the knife, just receiving the truth of it the way she'd received the insult of it, folded down, stored away, untouched at the core. And then Lieutenant General Holly's Crane, 3 stars on his collar and 30 hard years behind him, did the thing I had come up that mountain never expecting to see a man like him do. He came to attention. On the lip of the world, in the hanging dust, in front of his staff and his photographer and 8 elite shooters and a broken-kneed range master, the general squared his shoulders and brought his hand up slow and crisp to the brim of his cover, and he held it there, and he saluted her. "I was wrong," he said, holding the salute. "I was wrong about you in every way a man can be wrong, and I am ashamed of it, and I will carry that. I told them no one but the best could ring that plate." His voice caught just slightly, just once. "I was looking at the best, and I sent her to carry sand. Forgive an old fool, Chief. It would be the honor of my career if you'd let me shake your hand." She brought her own hand up then and returned the salute, clean, correct, unhurried, and when he dropped his she took the hand he offered and shook it once, and that was all. No speech from her. No vindication thrown back in his teeth. Just the salute returned and the hand shaken, the account settled in the plainest possible terms, the way she settled everything. But the line was not done. That is the part I have to tell, the part that still puts a thickness in my throat when I tell it. Because the young shooter, the 8th man, the one with the gift, the one she'd handed her dope card to like communion, he had been standing apart, watching, and when the general dropped the salute, the young man stepped forward and came to attention and saluted her too, on his own, with no one ordering it, his face open and unashamed. And then the 7th shooter saluted. And the 5th, the proud one who'd come a hand's breadth from the steel. And then they were all saluting, the whole line of elite shooters one after another down the bench, and then Crane's staff, the polished officers who'd laughed the obligatory laugh at dawn, and then Ostrowski, the boy who'd built the berm beside her, his young face wet in the cold and not caring who saw. One by one, unbidden, every soul on that frozen shelf came to attention and saluted the woman the general had walked past, and the salutes ran down the line like a flame down a fuse, and she stood in the center of them, small and still and composed, and received every one. And I will tell you what I did, because a man should be honest about his own part, especially the part he is least proud of and the part that, in the end, mattered most to him. I had obeyed the order. I had pulled her off my own line and sent her to carry sand because a general told me to, and I had 4 years to my pension and a ruined knee, and I had told myself there was nothing else a man in my place could do. I had been wrong about that, the way I'd been half wrong about 100 quiet ones over 26 years on the line. So I was the last to salute her, and I did it last on purpose, because I wanted her to see that the man who'd run her off the line knew exactly what he'd done, and was setting it right with his eyes open. I limped forward on my bad knee, and I came to attention the best I could, and I brought my hand up and I held it, and I looked her in the eye over it, and I said the only thing I had the right to say. "I scored every round you fired today, Chief," I said. "I'm going to put them on the record under your name where they belong, and I'm sorry I made you carry sand." She looked at me a long moment, and for the first time all day something moved in her face that was not just the quiet, something warmer, something that had been a long time coming and had cost her something to keep folded away. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing underneath a smile, the thing a smile is the surface of. "You ran a good line, Master Sergeant," she said. "You cleared me when it counted, that's the whole job." And she nodded at my bad knee, the one she could not have helped but notice, the one that had complained to me before dawn that the day would ask too much of all of us. "Sit down off that leg. You've earned it. I'll help you log the dope." And she did. while the general's people sorted out the recovery and got the bird in the air once the wind let up and pulled the pinned driver out of his cab alive. She sat beside me on an ammunition crate at the lip of the world and helped me write up the range log, her shots and her solutions in her cramped, neat hand beside my scoring in mine. And we put her name on the record of the saddle where it has stayed ever since. The only person to ring the anvil that season, the only person to ring it that year. And I have heard, the only person to ring it cold first round in the whole life of that range before they finally closed it. They closed the saddle a few years after. The line came down. The anvil came off the wall, and they say it sits in a case at a school somewhere now, with the one dead center strike still flowering on its white face and a small plaque and a name. Her name. The name I'd taken at dawn for a clerk's typo. Tallow. I asked her about it that day, sitting on the crate with the log between us, what it meant, where it came from. She told me it was an old word from the candle trade, that tallow was the fat they rendered slow and patient until it gave a clean, steady flame that didn't gutter in the wind. I like that, she said. A light that holds in wind. And then she went quiet, and I understood she'd said all she was going to say about it, the way she'd said all she was going to say about everything, and I left it there, and I have never heard a call sign that fit a soul better. I am an old man now myself, older than Crane was that day, my knee long since traded for a new one that works better than the old ever did. I train the young range officers these days, the ones who'll run the lines after I'm gone, and I tell them a great many things about wind and dope and the discipline of the long gun. But the thing I most want them to carry is not about shooting at all, and so I save it for last, and I tell it the way I have told it to you, slow and whole, no corner cut. I tell them about the general who walked past her. I tell them how he looked right at the best shooter in the theater and saw a clerk, because she was quiet and small and did not perform her worth the way the loud men performed theirs, and how he sent her to carry sand. And then I tell them how she rang the anvil cold and brought a mountain down to save 5 men, and never once raised her voice, and how a 3-star general came to attention on the lip of the world and saluted her and called himself a fool, and how the whole line saluted after him, unbidden, one by one. And then I tell them the thing I most need them to know, the thing I learned too late and at someone else's expense, the thing I will carry to the end. I tell them, every line you ever run will have a quiet one on it. Someone small and still at the end of the bench who does not announce themselves, who does not perform, who simply waits, folded down to their working size, for the world to ask the right question. And the loud men will walk past them every time. Do not be the man who walks past. Look at the quiet ones. Score every round they fire. And when it counts, when the wind is lying and the clock is running and there is no one else who can read the truth in time, clear them to the line. Because the best one I ever scored carried sand all morning at a general's word, and rang the truth out of 2 miles of lying wind with one cold round, and brought a mountain down the safe way to save men who never even saw her face. And the only crack she ever showed was one fine tremor of a gloved hand that she closed into a fist before it could become anything at all. A light that holds in wind. I have run a lot of lines. I never saw another like her, and I have stopped expecting to, and I am content with that. It is enough to have stood on one cold shelf at the top of the world and watched a general learn what I learned, and to have been the man who, at the last, on a ruined knee, cleared her to the line.